Our goal for an example interactive graphic is going to come from the coronavirus spread across the United States. In particular, I want to be able to look at the spread both across space and across time. In order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to start out with a graph of the United States, and I want to have some sort of widget that allows me to move a slider around to change the date. And by changing that date, we'll be able to look at the spread spatially. And in order to do the look at the change over time as well, maybe we could have a second graph at the bottom that is controlled by that date sliding widget that will tell us information about how many cases existed at that point in time. The next thing that I want to be able to do is I also want to be able to compare regions. So maybe I want to be able to compare the state of California versus the state of Alabama. And I want to look at the growth rates in the number of people who have the disease for those individual states. And I'd like to compare those to the country as a whole as well. Now, to make some sort of adjustment for population, I'd also like to have the ability to look at the number of cases per capita or the number of cases per 100,000 people, something like that, just so that I'm making an apples to apples comparison in terms of the population sizes. So all of those things I want to have in the data and in the graphic that I've got. So what that's going to necessitate is county level information or state level information, and it needs to be per day. So let's start with what this might look like. So here we have a graph of the US, and I didn't draw this myself because whenever I draw the United States, it doesn't work so well. So you can kind of imagine that when we first start in the outbreak, we're going to see little spots in Seattle. We're going to see little spots in DC, and DC is somewhere around in here. And I want some way of being able to look at the change over time. And so you can sort of imagine that maybe we're going to end up with maybe a timeline and some sort of slidey thing where I can move this thing around left or right and have it change the date. And so as you slide it over, maybe we see the spread at a later point. At the very beginning is sort of the start of the pandemic. Now, the other thing that I kind of want to be able to do is I want to be able to look at not just where the cases are, but just how many cases there are. And so maybe we want to have some sort of graph that is like this. And again, this x-axis is going to be date. And so this little slider might actually go down here. So let's go ahead and move the slider down there. So we'll have a little slider there. And on this graph, this is going to be number of cases. And we should see something that looks like this. Now, this would work relatively well. So I could have this little slider right here, this guy, have that slider both affect this first graph and maybe have some sort of information in a little text box that says this is how many cases there were, and also have that same slider control what's going on this graph. So that would actually be relatively cool. Now, the other thing that I might want to do is I might want to be able to select an individual state and look and see how that state, their number of cases has changed. And so maybe we could end up selecting, I don't know, maybe California. Selecting California, maybe Texas, and I don't know, maybe Florida. And have it have the individual states come up. So maybe oops, let's undo that. So maybe maybe we end up with Texas, California, and Florida, something like that. So that we could end up seeing sort of the black line being the US as a whole and the red lines being individual states that we have picked out from this map. And so this gives us a way to both move the date around, and so this lower graph would modify the behavior of the upper graph, but also the upper graph allowing us to show the lower graph information as well. So this is a reasonable start to an interactive graph. You know, as I look at this, I like the ability to select individual states. I like the ability to sort of look at the US as a whole. I like the number of cases, but from a standpoint of what actually is relevant, one of the things that we might want to be able to do is change from the number of cases to the number of cases per 100,000 people or something like that. So let's have like a little checkbox over here that says cases and cases per 100,000, and allow the user to change whether they want to look at the raw number of cases or the cases per 100,000. Now, how we deal with the date, that might be interesting in terms of comparing across individual countries or individual states, excuse me. Maybe we want to have something that allows us to do since the first case, or time since the 10th case or something like that. I'm not entirely sure how we want to do that. Maybe we'll do that with a second graph down below, but we'll figure out how that wants to go. But I think this is a reasonable starting point for our interactive graph, because we know the data that we need. We need the daily case-by-case information, and we need to know the populations of the regions that we want to be selectable. And I also want to think about sort of, do I want this statewide or do I want this maybe countywide? And we'll see what sort of data we can find to do that. One of the data sets for coronavirus that has been widely used is this data set by Johns Hopkins University. And they've been maintaining this since the coronavirus really started going on an international scale. Now, in this data set on GitHub, you can find their raw data, and they've nicely made it very straightforward to do this. So we're going to just go click on this data set, and they've given us our time series as well. There's also a daily reports that is sort of the most updated version of things, but what we want is the time series, because we want to be able to click day by day by day. So we're going to go into this time series, and we have these sets of data to work with. And in particular, we've got the confirmed US data set, and that's what I'm going to use. There's also a deaths and a global version of these things as well, but we're going to go into this confirmed US. And what you can see is this is a preview of the CSV file that we're going to go and download. And you can see that we've got what looks to be county level information for all of the counties in the United States. So this looks actually pretty good. So I'm going to go and click on the raw version of this, and this is going to go to just a straight CSV file, and I am going to go ahead and save this. So File, Save As, and this is going to be, let's see, where do I want to save this? So I'm going to save it over in my notes for this class. So data raw, and do I have a coronavirus stuff yet? No, I don't. So I'm going to make a file that is COVID-19. And I'm going to save this. Excellent. So now I'm going to go ahead and start to do some data cleaning so that I can get to a something that is just the county name and the date. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work there. So let's open up Tableau Prep. Now we're over in Tableau Prep, and I want to read in the CSV file that I just downloaded. So I'm going to open up a new connection, and I'm going to go to a text file. And I'm now in this place where I just downloaded this file, right? And so we're going to open this guy up. All right, so this CSV file actually worked relatively well, and we now have a bunch of columns. So this ISO and ISO 3, these are the country abbreviations. Code 3 is sort of representing yet another sort of hierarchical geographic structure, same way with the FIPS code. So what we really care about is this province state example, and this is going to be our state level information, and this admin 2, this is going to be our county level information, and this country is going to be US. The latitude and longitude represent the centroids of those regions, and we're going to get rid of that. And then each of these columns is going to represent the date as the number of confirmed cases in that particular county on that particular day. So you can see January 22nd, there's going to be zeros in most counties, and eventually we're going to see a bunch more. So let's go ahead and read that in. And now I'm going to do a little cleaning step. So I'm going to go and add a step, and this is going to be a cleaning step where we're basically just going to get the columns that I want. So I'm going to get rid of a few of these here. I'm going to remove the geographic codes that we don't actually need, that are pretty superfluous for us. Kind of tedious. I'm going to call this my county level information. I'm going to call this my state. And we can get rid of the country because I know that this graph is going to just be the US. I don't need the latitude and longitude, so I'm going to remove those as well. This combined key is sort of the county, state, country level information, and I think that I can get rid of that as well. All right, so now we're left with just the county and the state and the date. So this is quite handy. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to move each state date combination to be a single row. So I'm going to do a pivot. And the reason why I'm going to do this is because I want to be able to slide things around, and the way this is going to work is I want to be able to do a filter command on whatever date is currently present. And so the way to do this is for each of these numbers to be a single row by itself. So I'm going to turn this into a long format, and that is going to be a pivot step. So the way that we're going to do this is we select the columns that we want to pivot, and we're going to drag those over here. And you can see the preview of what we have as the pivot names. So this is going to be our date, and the pivot values is going to be the number of infected for each county and state combination. So let's call this names. Let's call this date, because that's what it is. And let's call this values. Let's call that number for number of cases. All right, and so this is our data set. We have the individual state, we have the county within the state, we have the date, and we have the number of cases in that county. Next, we want to grab the information about the county level populations. And I did a little quick Googling to find the county population totals, and I came up with this web page from the US Census Bureau. And this will give me information about the county level information population estimates from 2010, the date of the last census, to the last estimates that we've got is July 1st, 2019. So that should work. So I'm just going to go and click on the United States, and that'll give me the county level information for every county in the United States. When I downloaded that, I came up with this Excel file, and we've got all of the county names. So this is all of the counties in Alabama, and we've got estimates from the latest census, and then the population estimates as of July 1st. So this is July 1st, 2019, and that's probably our best bet to use. So we want to use this column M and these county level information. So we're going to go ahead and import that into Tableau Prep and make a new setup. So let's do this. Okay, so now we're back in Tableau Prep, and I'm going to add a connection to an Excel file because that's how this thing got downloaded. And I renamed this to be US County Population Estimates, just so that's a little bit more descriptive to me. And once it's read in, because it's an Excel file, there's a couple of different things that Tableau thinks that it could be, and they're down here. So this is the main file, but there's two possibilities of how to read it in. And I'm going to just go ahead and look at both of these, even though I know what it's going to be. And this turns out to be the correct one. So this column that's going to be F1, this is going to be the actual county names, although the first row is the United States. And then I've got some other estimates as well, and I'm going to want this column for 19. So I could actually just get rid of these ones right here because I know that I only want the 2019 column. So I'm going to get rid of everything but that. And that's going to be what we read in. So we read in this F1, which is going to turn into our county names, and the 2019. All right, so let's do some cleaning on this because there's one last thing that I have to deal with, which is the fact that this United States, this is the overall population, and I don't want that. So let's add in a filter just so that we get rid of that first row. So let's add in, so I want to filter where F1 is not equal to United States. Let's do that. And that got rid of that first bit. Next, we need to split this F1 column into the county and the state name. But this is going to be a little more tricky than you would actually think. First off, notice that in Alabama, and actually most states, we've got this little county comma, and that'll actually separate the county name from the state name. But unfortunately, that's not consistent. Alaska is a great example. So there's a district here called the Aleutians East, and they refer to this as a borough. Aleutians West is referred to as a census area. The area around Anchorage is a municipality. So we've got a bunch of things that are sort of exist in the middle. We've got boroughs, we've got census areas, we've got municipalities, we've got cities. There's actually cities. And in Louisiana, they refer to things as parishes. So that middle section has to be actually really carefully thought out. So our plan of attack is, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to separate it by this comma. And that's going to be our first split. And that's going to give us our county name and our state name. And then in that county name, we're going to have to tear some stuff off at the end. But let's first start with a comma. So I am going to start with this F1, and I am going to split this, and I'm going to do a automatic split, and that automatic split is going to split on that comma. So we'll go ahead and do that. And so now we have our state name and our county name, and notice we've got some counties, we've got some parishes, and we have our East Borough and West Census area, so we need to deal with that. Alexandria, This actually is the city. The name of it is just Alexandria, District of Columbia. So we're going to try to have to deal with this. So let's first just name this as state. Let's name this as county. And let's talk about how to get rid of these counties and census areas. So in order to do this, what we really want to do is we want to figure out how do I get rid of this little county thing. So the way to do this is we're going to do a little bit of coding. So I'm going to create a calculated field here. And I'm going to say that the new version of county is going to be the old version of county, where I replace county with nothing. Now I'm going to end up doing this exact same thing for all the counties, the boroughs, the census areas, the cities, and the parishes as well. So this is going to get a little tedious because I'm going to have to do this for each one of these. So that got rid of my counties, and now I need to get rid of the boroughs. All right, so that should get rid of our boroughs and parishes. And lowercase cities. And census areas. So I've renamed the number, the population, just because that seems a little more appropriate. Now, I'm tempted to do a join between these two data sets right now, but there's one thing that's going to mess us up if we're not careful, which is the fact that some of these county names actually have a space at the end. And when I try to do a left join, the fact that there's a space in this set of county names, but there's not a space in these county names, is actually going to mess us up. So we need to double check that there's no spaces on the left hand or the right hand side of all of these names. So we're just going to go in and do a quick cleanup to make sure that this is clean. And so this is going to remove extra spaces. So that extra spaces is at the front and the back, but it's not going to remove the space in between Aleutians East and Aleutians West. So we're just going to remove extra spaces here, and we're going to remove extra spaces here as well. All right, so clean, remove extra spaces. All right, so now that we've got that, we're going to take these two cleaned versions and we are going to do a join on them. Now, notice by default, it's doing county is equal to county. But unfortunately, there are county names that are repeated between two different states. So I'm going to add another clause in here and say that state has to also equal state. And that should help us out quite a bit. Okay, after that join, we now have our data and we've got duplicates of the county and the state. And so I'm just going to get rid of some of those so that I only have one of them. But I want the number of cases, the date, the county, the state, and the population. So we're going to get rid of a couple of the counties and state information because we don't need this. And I'm also going to get rid of this F1 information as well. All right, so now we have the number of cases, the date, the county, the state, and the population of that county. Fabulous. So we're going to export this to a CSV file and bring that into Tableau so that we can make the graph that we want. Now I'm going to save this in the same working directory that I saved my source data as well, because that just keeping everything together makes sense. So we're going to call this COVID-19 cases and population. And now we're going to bring this into Tableau and actually finally get started on our interactive graphic. Now that we've got our data built up in a CSV file, we can now bring it over into Tableau. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to import this from a text file, and we saved this as this COVID-19 cases and we saved it as this COVID-19 cases population bit. And so we're going to open this guy up. And now we've got what we calculated before. We've got the number of cases, we've got the date, we've got the county, we've got the state, and we've got the population. Now, I think that I calculated this rate as well, which is the number of cases per 100,000. I don't think that I showed that on camera, but we've got that as well. So let's go ahead and start to build our two graphs that we want to put together. So let's start this graph out. So this graph is going to be my map. So let's first entitle this thing map, just so that it's clear what I'm doing. And to start with, we're going to need to take our geographic information and plop it over onto this data set. Now, unfortunately, right now, we've just got the state as the geographic area. And this is one of the problems that is sort of frustrating within Tableau, is how to get this so that we have the county information as well. So I'm going to go and drag the counties on here as well. And now you can see we actually have all of our counties, and the dots in this eastern half of the United States is just enormous. So the dots aren't really helpful. But instead what we want to do is we want to color this by the number of cases, for example. So we're going to go ahead and we've got this number, which actually came in as a categorical variable. So we're going to plop this down so that it knows that it's continuous, and then we're going to plop this onto my number there. Now, we actually don't have a huge amount of grade coloration here, difference. And the reason is because there are some counties that have quite a lot, and so this total sum is actually having a problem. So we need to be a little bit careful. So the problem really is the fact that we've got a sum in here. And so let's start with a filter on the date so that we can figure out what needs to happen. Because right now we're looking at all of the dates individually, and that isn't so great. So we're going to throw a filter on the individual date. And let's go ahead and just pick the last date that I've got. I'm going to click OK there. And so now we've got, our maximum number is 63,000, but that seems a little weird to me. So what's going on? So in order to figure out what was going on, I had to make sure that I was displaying all of the rows. So what I did was I just went in and said, I want to look at 50,000 rows. And there aren't 50,000 rows, there's only 232,000 rows. But what this allowed me to do was to get all of the data in view. And then I just sorted by the number of cases. And so this is just changing. If you click on this, this will change it from the sort order. And you can see what's going on is New York is, they're getting hammered. And so as a result, this number is making it so that this map looks pretty uniform, because what's going on is if I were to zoom in on New York City, let's zoom in. New York is somewhere down in here. We got to zoom in even more. Yeah, there we go. It's right there. All right, so this little tiny area is where sort of our epicenter is. And so this little tiny amount of blue is not showing up. And so what we want to do is we'd like to make this map instead of showing the number of cases, maybe we ought to do some sort of transformation so that we see some sort of difference between things, because LA County is, we've got 4,000 cases there versus 300 in San Bernardino, but the difference here isn't very large. So what I want to do is I want to compress this number scale. And so maybe I ought to do, instead of the number of cases, maybe I ought to do the log base 10 number of cases. So let's make the log base 10 number of cases so that we get some gradation. So in order to do this, we're just going to go and make a calculated field again. So let's go over here and create a calculated field off of number. And notice that we've got the log of what we want to take, and then it asks us to give us the base. So we're going to take base 10. All right, excellent. So now we've got this big numbers being right around 4,000. Now the downside is that when I have zeros, log base 10 of 0 is negative infinity. So that's not so great. But I think that's how we're going to do this. So let's go ahead and change the color from the number to the log base 10 number. All right, excellent. So now you can see that this upper New York area, this upper northeast area, has a lot more number of cases. You can clearly see that Los Angeles County is a hot spot. You can now see this stuff up in Denver is doing its thing, and likewise up in Seattle as well. So that actually looks relatively good. I'm pretty happy with that. So the critical thing is that we've got this filter on what date it is, and we're going to, when we make our interactive graphic, we're going to have some sort of mechanism that defines this filter so that we can sort of slide along what that is. Now, you might look at this and say, well, why are you summing the log base 10? What does that mean? Well, once I have a county and a date, there's actually only one value there. So I could do the sum, I could do the average, and nothing really should change for this. So taking the average, just in case there are two variables in there, that might be a better choice than summing it. I'm not entirely sure where we would have a mistake there, but just to be safe, summing probably is a better choice, or taking the average is probably a better choice. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to build a second graph, and that graph is going to show the overall number of cases over time. So let's go ahead and make that new graph, and let's call this total number of cases. So maybe total cases. And what we want here is we want date on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we want the number of cases. Now, unfortunately, when I just drug date across, it decided that maybe it should only do year, which isn't what we want. So what we want is we want actually the date, so the actual day. So now we've got this graph where we can see across the United States, back in January we had 1 case, February 11 cases, February now into March, and all of a sudden we are seeing this sort of, this part seems exponential. This part looks like it might be starting to flatten out, but we still have 300,000 cases. So this is pretty substantial. All right, fabulous. So given that we now have a map and we have the number of cases, the next thing that I want to do is I want to create what's called a dashboard. Now, if you look down here, we've got this little grid thing, and that is what's going to be a dashboard. So let's go ahead and do this. So notice we've got our two sheets. We've got our map sheet and we've got our total cases sheet. And so we're just going to take the individual sheets and put them sort of where we want them to be. So I'm going to have a map or a graph that is sort of like this. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to do an action where if I were to select a value here, then that goes and changes this map up here. But unfortunately, this map right here is based solely on my April 5th data. So let's go back over to this map and let's get rid of this filter so that that date isn't there. So now we're going to have a more obnoxious graph where this is based off of the whole set of data. Now, over here, what I can do is we can do something that is called an action. And what I want is for there to be an action that when I select a date here, it modifies this number or this graph up here. So there's two different ways that we can do this. Now over right here in this little, what looks like a funnel is the filter command. And what this does is it'll say when you select a value here, in particular it'll select the date, it'll say, all right, only use that date's information across the rest of this graph, these graphs. So if I use this as a filter, now notice as I select different dates, the graph up on top is changing. And so at the very beginning, you can see a hotspot in San Diego, Santa Clara, and maybe, oh, you see a little bit in over near Chicago. And I bet you New York is still a little funny, but it's hard for me to select New York because it's so small. So this is pretty cool. This allows me to move things around relatively decently. So the fundamental idea between how we're going to make an interactive graphic in Tableau is we're going to allow us to interact with one graph and use that as a filter on the data set for the data that informs the other graphs in your interactive graphic experience.